I'm Sloan, 22 years old, and I'm standing in the middle of my college graduation auditorium in Ohio, staring at a row of empty VIP seats with my family's name taped to them. My friend leaned over and whispered, "Wait, did your family not show up, or do you just not have one?" Right then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my dad. It read, "You embarrassed me enough by making a scene about this useless piece of paper. Your brother is making actual power moves today. We are leaving." I stood there, fully humiliated in front of thousands of people, clutching a diploma I worked 2 jobs to pay for. My mother didn't even call. My little brother didn't care. They literally walked out on the biggest day of my life to go celebrate him buying a sports car with money they don't even have. In that exact moment, as the crowd cheered for everyone else, a cold switch flipped inside me. I wiped my face, looked at those empty seats, and made a silent promise to myself. They wanted to treat me like a ghost? Fine, but I was going to make them regret throwing me away like trash. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the day I became their worst nightmare. If you have ever been treated like the black sheep by the people who were supposed to love you the most, hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you'll want to see exactly how I made them pay for this. The sound of the graduation march was still ringing in my ears when I shifted my car into gear, driving away from the university that had been my only sanctuary for 4 long years. To my parents, Gerald and Deborah, this degree was just a piece of paper. But to me, it represented 3,000 nights of burnt coffee and aching feet from double shifts at the local diner. I had paid for every single credit hour myself because my father made it clear early on that his hard-earned money was reserved for. Colton was 19 and had the financial literacy of a toddler, yet my parents treated him like a rising Wall Street prodigy. While I was bicycling to class in the rain to save gas money, Colton was crashing his second used car, only for Mom to swoop in and buy him a brand new truck the next week. She used to look me dead in the eye and say that as the eldest daughter, my role was to be the pillar of the family, which in her language meant being the silent ATM. The real betrayal happened during my junior year. I had managed to scrape together $10,000 in a high-yield savings account, money I intended to use for a down payment on a small apartment after graduation. I woke up one Tuesday morning to find the balance at 0. When I confronted my parents in our kitchen, Dad didn't even look up from his newspaper. He told me that Colton had an incredible business opportunity involving some offshore crypto trading and needed an initial investment. "Your family, Sloan," Deborah had said, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary concern she always used when she was stealing from me. "Colton is going to make us all rich. You're being selfish by hoarding that money when your brother is trying to build a future for the Harrison name." I remember standing there, my hands shaking, realizing that my own mother had forged my signature on the withdrawal slips. She didn't see it as a crime. She saw it as her right. I didn't call the police then, a mistake that still haunts me, because I still clung to the delusional hope that if I just worked harder, if I just proved my worth by graduating at the top of my class, they would finally see me as a person instead of a resource. Every time Colton blew through another $1,000 on designer clothes or late-night parties in downtown Cincinnati, my father would just pat him on the back and tell him that winners take risks. Meanwhile, I was stealing extra condiment packets from work so I wouldn't have to buy groceries for the week. They watched me struggle, watched me lose weight from stress and lack of sleep, and they never offered a single dime or a good job. By the time my senior year rolled around, I had stopped talking to them about my life entirely. I kept my head down, worked 3 jobs, and rebuilt my credit score from the wreckage Colton had left behind. I thought I had seen the worst of their greed, but as I pulled into my driveway that evening after the graduation, I had no idea that the $10,000 was just the tip of the iceberg. The fluorescent lights of the university parking lot flickered as I sat in my beat-up sedan, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Just as I was about to pull out, a shadow crossed my window, and a gentle knock broke the silence. It was Everett, his face a mixture of pity and quiet rage as he handed me a single bouquet of sunflowers through the open window. He had been my rock since freshman year, the only person who saw me as something more than a revolving line of credit for my family's failures. "They really didn't come, did they?" Everett asked, his voice low as he leaned against the car door. He didn't need to say more. He knew the history, the broken promises, and the cold reality of my household. I didn't answer because my phone suddenly erupted with notifications, a relentless stream of pings that felt like needles under my skin. I pulled up my Instagram feed, and there it was, a post from Colton that felt like a physical blow to my stomach. He was standing in a high-end dealership showroom in downtown Columbus, leaning against a brand-new lime green Mustang with a massive red bow on the hood. My mother, Deborah, was beaming beside him, her arm draped over his shoulder like he had just won a Nobel Prize instead of dropping out of community college for the third time. The caption read, "Big moves only. Huge thanks to Mom and Dad for the early graduation gift. Who needs a degree when you have horsepower?" I felt the bile rise in my throat as I hit the call button for my mother's number. She picked up on the third ring, and I could hear the loud, obnoxious music of the dealership's lounge in the background. "Sloan, honey, is that you?" she chirped, her voice lacking even a shred of guilt. "Listen, we're a bit busy right now. Colton finally found his calling in luxury car flipping, and we had to strike while the iron was hot. I graduated today, Mom," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound cold. I walked across that stage in front of 5,000 people, and my own parents were at a Ford dealership buying a car for a kid who hasn't worked a day in his life. "Don't be so dramatic, Sloan," she snapped, the sweetness evaporating instantly. "You've always been so obsessed with your own achievements. Gerald and I decided that Colton needed a win more than you did. You already have your fancy degree. You don't need a party, too. Besides, we used your excellent credit score to secure the financing for the Mustang. It's for the family business, so really, you should be happy you're finally contributing something useful." My heart stopped. I stared at Everett, who had heard every word through the speakerphone. They hadn't just ignored my graduation, they had used my identity to sign for a $50,000 loan for a car Colton would probably wrap around a telephone pole within a month. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The rage that had been simmering for years suddenly turned into a razor-sharp clarity. "You used my name for a car loan?" I asked, my voice now eerily calm. "It's just a signature, Sloan," my father, Gerald, shouted from the background, clearly annoyed that I was interrupting their celebration. "We're your parents. Everything we have belongs to you, and everything you have belongs to us. That's how a real American family works. Now, stop being a brat, and let us enjoy this moment with your brother." He hung up. The silence that followed in the parking lot was deafening. Everett reached out and took my hand, his eyes burning with an intensity I had never seen before. He knew that this wasn't just another family argument. This was a declaration of war. I looked at the sunflowers on the passenger seat, then at the digital image of my mother hugging her golden boy, and I realized that the Sloan, who used to beg for their love, had died in that auditorium. The kitchen of my small apartment felt smaller than usual as Everett and I sat at the laminate table, the neon green Mustang from the Instagram post still burned into my retinas. He was busy making me a cup of tea I didn't want, his quiet presence the only thing keeping me from driving back to the dealership and screaming until my lungs gave out. My phone, which I had tossed onto the counter, vibrated with a frantic series of pings that sounded different from the earlier notifications. It was an encrypted message from Monica, my younger cousin who had always been the fly on the wall at every Harrison family gathering. "Check your email, Sloan," the text read. I wasn't supposed to see this, but they forgot I was still logged into the shared iPad at the house. "You need to see what they're saying about you." I opened my laptop with trembling fingers, and a PDF file titled Family Group Chat appeared in my inbox. As I scrolled through the screenshots, the air left my lungs. The group was named The Real Harrisons, a digital sanctuary for my parents and Colton that explicitly excluded me. But there was a fourth member, Vanessa. I knew her as Colton's latest girlfriend, a woman 10 years older than him, with sharp, microbladed eyebrows and a penchant for expensive handbags he couldn't afford. The messages dated back 6 months. Vanessa was the one who had masterminded the entire car loan scheme. "Sloan has that clean credit history from all those years of being a boring overachiever," one of her texts read, followed by a series of laughing emojis. "If Colton signs as her, the dealership won't even double-check. It's not identity theft if it's for the family business, right? Gerald, tell her she's being a team player." My father, Gerald, had replied with a thumbs up. She's too busy studying to notice a few inquiries on her credit report. We'll tell her after the car is sold for a profit. Colton needs this win more than she needs a gold star on her diploma. But it got darker. Vanessa wasn't just after a car. She was whispering in my mother's ear about my future earnings. Once Sloan gets that high-paying corporate job in Chicago, we can have her co-sign for the new house in the suburbs. Deborah, you deserve a kitchen with marble islands, and Sloan owes you for raising her. We just have to keep her feeling guilty enough to keep saying yes. My mother, Deborah, had responded with a heart emoji. She's always been our little workhorse. I'll make sure she stays humble. I've already told her we're too broke to help with her move, so she'll be desperate enough to come to us for advice soon. I felt a cold, crystalline anger replace the heat of my earlier rage. They weren't just biased, they were predatory. Vanessa was using my family as a scalpel to bleed me dry, and my parents were happy to hand her the blade. They had planned to ruin my financial future before I even had my first day of work, all to fund a lifestyle for a son who couldn't even manage a checkbook, and a woman who was clearly bleeding them white in the process. They're planning to use me for a mortgage next, I whispered, turning the screen toward Everett. They don't just want my money, Everett, they want my entire life. Everett looked at the screen, his jaw tightening so hard I thought his teeth might crack. He pointed to a message from Vanessa at the very bottom, sent just an hour ago during the car celebration. Sloan is calling Mom and crying about her graduation. Tell her to shut up and pay the first insurance premium. We need to take the Mustang to the Hamptons this weekend. I closed the laptop with a sharp click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I didn't need to hear any more excuses about family loyalty or eldest daughter responsibilities. Monica had given me the ammunition I needed to burn the bridge entirely. I realized then that Vanessa had underestimated one thing. A workhorse knows exactly how much weight it can carry, and I was about to drop the entire burden right back onto their heads. The glass doors of the marketing firm where I had just started my junior associateship swung open, revealing the two people I had spent 14 days trying to erase from my mind. I was sitting at my desk, surrounded by the quiet hum of productivity and the smell of expensive roast coffee, when I saw my father's faded flannel shirt and my mother's frantic, overly rehearsed expression in the lobby. They didn't belong in this world of polished marble and high-stakes deadlines. They looked like intruders, and the way the receptionist was eyeing them told me they had already made a scene before I even stood up. "Sloan, we need to talk to you right now," Gerald barked, his voice echoing off the high ceilings and causing several of my senior partners to look up from their laptops. He didn't ask how my first week was. He didn't apologize for the Mustang. He just marched toward my cubicle like he owned the building. I stood up, smoothing my blazer and keeping my face as impassive as a stone wall. "This is a place of business, Dad. If you didn't schedule an appointment, you need to leave." "Don't you start with that corporate attitude with us," Deborah hissed, leaning over my desk and nearly knocking over my computer monitor. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but I knew her well enough to see the calculation behind the tears. "Everything is falling apart. That woman, Vanessa, she's gone. She took Colton's investment money, the entire $30,000 we pulled from the equity line, and just vanished. And now the bank is calling about the Mustang loan. They say if the first payment isn't made by Friday, they're going to initiate a repossession." "That sounds like a Colton problem," I replied, my voice eerie and quiet. "And since you both signed off on it, it's a Gerald and Deborah problem too." My father slammed a stack of legal-looking documents onto my desk. "It's your problem because your name is on the primary signature line, Sloan. The bank told us that since Colton has no verifiable income, you are the one they're coming after. We need you to sign these papers for a debt consolidation loan. It'll put the car and the house under one payment, and all you have to do is guarantee it with your new salary. It's the only way to save the family home." I looked down at the papers. It was a predatory trap disguised as a lifeline. If I signed that document, I would be legally tethered to their financial ruin for the next 30 years. I would be paying for Colton's Mustang and Vanessa's vanished lifestyle, while my own dreams were liquidated to pay their interest rates. "I'm not signing anything," I said, sliding the documents back toward him. "In fact, I spent my lunch break yesterday at the local precinct filing an identity theft report. I've already alerted the bank that the signature on that car loan was forged. I gave them Colton's name and yours, Dad. The fraud department is opening an investigation as we speak. The color drained from my mother's face, leaving her looking older and sharper. You did what? You reported your own brother to the police? Over a car? Sloan, we are your parents. We gave you life. And you tried to take my future to pay for his mistakes, I countered, stepping out from behind my desk so I was standing eye to eye with Gerald. You have 5 minutes to walk out of this building before I call security and have you trespassed. If you ever show up at my place of work again, I will file for a restraining order. Go home, sell the Mustang if it hasn't been stripped yet, and figure it out yourselves. The workhorse is officially retired. My father looked like he wanted to swing at me, his face turning a dark, dangerous shade of purple, but the sight of 2 security guards approaching from the elevators stopped him. He grabbed the papers, his hands shaking with a mix of fury and genuine fear. You think you're so smart with your degree and your fancy office? He spat, leaning in close enough that I could smell the stale cigarettes on his breath. But you're going to be very lonely when you realize you have no one left to call when the world turns on you. I'd rather be lonely than a victim, I said, watching as the guards took them by the arms and led them toward the exit. As the glass doors closed behind them, I didn't feel the guilt they were trying so hard to plant in me. I felt the first real breath of freedom I'd had in 22 years. The official letter from the fraud department of the bank arrived on a Tuesday, its crisp white envelope looking harmless but containing enough legal weight to shatter my parents' world. I sat in my lawyer's office in downtown Cincinnati, watching as he scanned the documents, confirming that the signature on the $50,000 Mustang loan was indeed a forgery. My credit score, which had taken a nosedive into the low 500s, was finally being contested and restored. But for Gerald and Deborah, the nightmare was just beginning. Since you filed the formal identity theft report, Sloan, the bank is no longer coming after you, my lawyer explained, adjusting his glasses. But the law is very specific. They are now legally obligated to pursue the people who actually signed those papers. That means the dealership, the bank, and the local precinct are all looking at your father and Colton for bank fraud. I didn't feel the surge of guilt they expected me to feel. Instead, I felt a strange, cold peace. While I was rebuilding my life, the life they had built on lies was collapsing in real time. According to Monica, the neighborhood was already talking. The lime green Mustang had been towed from their driveway in broad daylight 3 days ago, right in front of the gossiping neighbors who had watched Colton brag about his success only weeks earlier. Colton was currently hiding in the basement, refusing to answer the door as process servers tried to hand him subpoenas for unpaid credit card debts totaling over $15,000. Without Vanessa to guide his spending, he had spiraled, trying to invest the remaining family cash into more failing schemes that only deepened their hole. My mother, Deborah, had spent the last 48 hours calling every relative we had, begging for a loan to keep the house from going into foreclosure, but the well had finally run dry. I decided it was time to put the final nail in the coffin of their public reputation. I posted a single, long-form status update on my Facebook page, tagging my parents and Colton. I didn't use insults or emotional pleas. I simply posted the photos Everett had taken of the empty VIP seats at my graduation, followed by the screenshots Monica had sent me of their plan to ruin my credit for a car. I captioned it, "For 22 years, I was told that family was everything. Today, I am choosing my future over their greed. I wish them luck with their debts, but I am no longer their collateral." The reaction was instantaneous. Our extended family, who had always been told I was the difficult and ungrateful daughter, were horrified by the evidence. My mother's bridge club and my father's drinking buddies saw the cold, calculated messages about using me for a mortgage. By the next morning, Gerald couldn't even walk into the local hardware store without getting cold stares from people who had known him for decades. In a small town in Ohio, reputation is the only currency that matters, and theirs was now worth less than zero. "They're calling the apartment again," Everett said that evening, holding up his phone, which showed a dozen blocked calls from my mother's cell. "They're desperate, Sloan. The bank gave them a 10-day notice to vacate. They're actually going to lose the house." "They didn't lose it, Everett," I said, looking out the window at the city lights. "They sold it the moment they decided a Mustang was worth more than their daughter. I'm just the one who stopped paying the interest on their betrayal." I watched as a detective from the local precinct left a voicemail on my machine, asking for one last statement before they moved forward with the criminal charges against Colton for the forgery. My brother, the golden boy who was supposed to make us all rich, was now facing a felony charge and a future of minimum wage shifts, if he was lucky. The silence from my end wasn't out of malice. It was simply because I had nothing left to say to people who only saw me as a paycheck. The shrill ring of my phone at 4 a.m. felt like a jagged piece of glass cutting through the silence of my bedroom. I reached for it, my heart hammering against my ribs, only to see a frantic string of text messages from my father, Gerald. "Your mother had a massive heart attack. She's in the ICU at Mercy Health. The doctors say the stress from the lawsuits is killing her. If you have any soul left, you'll get here now." I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, the familiar weight of daughterly guilt trying to pull me under, but the memory of those empty graduation seats acted like a life vest. I didn't call back. Instead, I got dressed in silence, grabbed my digital recorder, and drove to the hospital. When I arrived at the sterile, white-walled corridors of the cardiac wing, I didn't rush to the nursing station. I knew my mother's penchant for dramatic flair, especially when a bill was due or a secret was out. I crept down the hallway, keeping my head down, and found her room number. The door was cracked open just a few inches, allowing the low murmur of voices to drift into the hall. Peering through the gap, I didn't see a woman fighting for her life. Deborah was sitting upright in the hospital bed, her hospital gown perfectly arranged, casually dipping a French fry into a container of ranch dressing that Gerald had clearly smuggled in from a nearby drive-thru. There were no oxygen masks, no frantic monitors, just a standard saline drip and the sound of my parents plotting their next move. "You're sure she's coming, Gerald?" Deborah asked, her voice as strong and manipulative as ever, without a hint of the shortness of breath associated with cardiac distress. "I put on the waterproof mascara so I can cry when she walks in. We have to make her feel like every second I spend in this bed is her fault. If she doesn't drop the identity theft charges against Colton, he's going to spend 5 years in a state penitentiary. We need her to sign a sworn affidavit saying she authorized that Mustang loan." "She'll come," Gerald grunted, leaning back in the plastic visitor's chair. "Sloan is soft. She's always been desperate for your approval. Once she sees you hooked up to these machines, she'll do whatever we want. We'll tell her the hospital bills are $50,000 and that she needs to take out a personal loan to cover them, since we lost the house insurance. We can use that money to get Colton a lawyer and maybe a down payment on a small condo for us." I felt a wave of cold nausea wash over me. But it wasn't from sadness. It was the absolute, final realization that I was nothing more than a financial strategy to them. They were willing to fake a life-threatening emergency and incur thousands of dollars in unnecessary medical debt just to bait me into a legal trap. I pulled out my phone, hit the record button, and held it near the door for 3 full minutes as they discussed exactly how they would guilt-trip me into financial slavery. "Don't forget the part about her being a disappointment," Deborah reminded him, laughing softly between bites of food. "Tell her that my heart broke the moment she turned her back on her own blood. That always gets her." I tucked the phone back into my pocket, the recording saved and backed up to the cloud. I didn't burst into the room. I didn't scream at them for being monsters. That would have given them the emotional engagement they were starving for. Instead, I simply turned around and walked back toward the elevators. On my way out, I stopped at the billing department and gave them my parents' new mailing address, making it very clear that I was not a guarantor for any of Deborah's expenses. By the time I reached my car, the sun was beginning to rise over the Ohio skyline. I blocked my father's number and my mother's number permanently. They were waiting for a daughter who no longer existed, sitting in a hospital room they couldn't afford, waiting to perform a play for an audience of one who had already left the theater. The soft Sloan was gone, and in her place was someone who finally understood that sometimes the only way to win is to stop playing the game. The heavy oak doors of the county courthouse in Hamilton, Ohio, swung shut behind me as I walked toward the witness stand. I didn't look at my parents, who were seated at the defense table with a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Gerald's suit was rumpled, and Deborah was wearing a black veil, still trying to play the part of a grieving, sickly mother for the benefit of the judge. Colton sat between them, his head bowed, no longer the arrogant boy who bragged about Mustangs on the internet. The bank was suing them for $55,000 in unpaid loans and damages, and they had countersued me, claiming I had verbally authorized the use of my credit as a gift. Their lawyer stood up and started a long, winding speech about how I was a cold, ungrateful daughter who was trying to put her sick mother in the grave and her brother in a prison cell over a simple misunderstanding. He called me a liar, a traitor to my own blood, and someone who had forgotten the American values of family loyalty. I waited until he was finished. Then I looked the judge directly in the eye and handed my lawyer the digital recorder from the hospital. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady and echoing through the courtroom, "I would like to present evidence of the simple misunderstanding my parents are referring to." The recording filled the silent room. Every word of their scheme, the fake heart attack, the plan to steal another $50,000 from me, and the laughter about my softness, played out for everyone to hear. The judge's expression went from neutral to disgusted in less than 30 seconds. Deborah's weak posture vanished as she realized her own voice was convicting her. She stood up and screamed that I had invaded her privacy, but the judge slammed his gavel down so hard it sounded like a thunderclap. The ruling was swift and devastating. The judge dismissed their countersue and ordered the bank to move forward with the immediate foreclosure of their home to satisfy the debts. Because of the clear evidence of identity theft and bank fraud, Colton was sentenced to 200 hours of community service and 3 years of probation, narrowly escaping jail time only because I chose not to push for the maximum felony charge. I wasn't being kind. I just wanted them out of my life forever without the tether of a criminal trial. Outside on the courthouse steps, a week after the ruling, I watched from across the street as the sheriff's department arrived at my childhood home. They were there to serve the final vacate notice. Gerald and Deborah were loading what was left of their lives into a rusted U-Haul truck, a few boxes of clothes, some old furniture, and the trophies Colton had won in middle school. They were moving into a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, a place that smelled of damp wood and failure. Gerald saw me standing there and started shouting, calling me a snake and a heartless bitch while the neighbors watched from their porches, their phones out to record the downfall of the town's most notorious family. I didn't say a word back. I just turned my back on them and walked toward Everett, who was waiting with my luggage already in the trunk of his car. I had already signed the paperwork to legally change my last name. The Harrison name was dead to me, buried under the weight of their greed. I had a new job waiting for me in a city 3 states away, a place where no one knew about the girl who paid for her own graduation while her family bought a Mustang. As we drove past the city limits of the town that had raised me to be a victim, I looked at the legal documents in my lap. I was debt-free, guilt-free, and finally, for the first time in 22 years, I was truly alone, and it felt beautiful.